Hi, everyone. Today we're going to talk about dramatic history. So some of our key points for today's lecture. One, the history of drama is linked to the history of citizenship, and you'll be doing a discussion board post this week to reflect on that a little bit. Another point we'll come up with today is all theater is political, whether it is supporting the dominant regime or dissenting from the dominant paradigm. Most of the theater that we'll look at in today's lecture is, certainly in Greece and the Middle Ages, we're looking at theater that is supportive of government agendas. We will also think about the idea that drama can reflect society and can lead to social change. So politics and society and citizenship are some of the ideas we'll be dealing with in today's lecture material. All right. So we'll go through a few different periods. The first one is in ancient Greece, where we will think about the idea that theater teaches democratic citizenship. Then in medieval Europe, we will think about citizenship in relation to God and the church. During the Renaissance and Restoration periods in Europe, the idea will be that theater upholds absolute monarchy. And from the French Revolution into modernity, we'll be looking at the notion that theater advocates for the rights of the individual. So this is not necessarily a positivist narrative of progress, right? I mean, we're looking at democracy all the way back in ancient Greece. But this will be a good way to structure some of the ideas that we'll be seeing today. So theater teaches democratic citizenship in ancient Greece. We're thinking more about citizenship in relation to God and the Catholic Church in medieval Europe. Absolute monarchy being the framework for thinking about theater and politics in the Renaissance and Restoration periods. And then an advocacy for the rights of the individual starting around the time of the French Revolution and into the modern era and the industrial era. So one of the ways that we can think about this is through Terrence McNally's play And Away We Go, which you have in your course pack. And we're supposed to read for today, hopefully you did. So we've got Athens, 458 BC at the Theater of Dionysus is kind of the first scene there, and we see the mask maker and the actor, and they're thinking about how they relate to Greek citizenship in this period. We have a cannon blast, and then we immediately are transported to London in 1610 at the Globe Theatre, where Shakespeare's plays would be done. And then the next historical era that we see is in France in 1789, around the time of the French Revolution, at the Royal Theatre at Versailles. After that, we get to Moscow, to the Moscow Art Theater and Anton Chekhov's work. And then eventually we end up in Coconut Grove, Florida in 1956, where they're performing Samuel Beckett's play Waiting for Godot. And all of this is framed by the idea of a resident theater company in the present, which at the time the play was written was the Pearl Theater in New York City. And so it was a celebration really of the Pearl Theater specifically and plays that they had done, including the Oresteia and various plays throughout history. So if you can track a lot of this and the ideas of citizenship through this play And Away We Go, that might be a helpful way to think about it. One thing that's really interesting about the prologue to And Away We Go is that it starts with a ritual. The six actors enter in turn, they kiss the stage, then rise to speak to us. They say their name, they say how long they've been acting, and a number of other things about each other. And this, I think, is a really interesting connection to the history of the origins of theater in ritual. There tends to be a belief among scholars that theater originated in ritual, and at some point in the ancient Greek tradition, it's Thespis is the first actor who steps out of the chorus and impersonates a character, right? So that many of these rituals were perhaps related to the impersonation of gods, and were hoping to inspire religious ecstasy or religious fervor in the audience. That's not necessarily the case with And Away We Go, right? This is a different kind of ritual, but. All right, so jumping to ancient Greece, where theater teaches citizenship. We have a map of ancient Greece here. We can see that the area is very much dominated by water. So ancient Greece is a maritime society. We have a lot of sailing and trade on ships. If you look, most of where we're going to be thinking about is Athens, which is shown as Atenae on this map. There is a theater at Epidaurus that still exists, and so people often travel to Epidaurus to see the ruins of that theater. Thebes is an important location in Greek tragedy. A lot of plays are set in Thebes. And then Delphi, the oracle at Delphi, is a famous place where one would go for, again, a religious practice. So when we're talking about theater and citizenship in ancient Greece, generally this starts around the 5th century BC or BCE. And we are thinking about the city Dionysia. So the city Dionysia is a festival honoring the god Dionysus, who is the god of wine and fertility and of theater. So the celebration has something to do with drunkenness to an extent, although the Greeks did like to mix their wine with water. But the city Dionysia is meant to celebrate Dionysus. And some of the plays feature that god as a character or feature the chorus singing hymns of praise to the god Dionysus. This was a communal political experience, and male citizens were expected to attend the theater. They would sit with their tribe. There were 10 tribes in ancient Athens. And so this, again, was in some ways a performance of citizenship, right? You would show up and sit with your particular group to demonstrate your solidarity with that group and your strength and familial ties with that group and where you fit in the world of ancient Athens, the political world of ancient Athens. The theater could fit 17,000 spectators, which is quite a bit smaller than Spartan Stadium, but also quite a bit larger than most theaters that we can go to today. So it's a different, again, type of thing that's probably closer to the atmosphere of a football game than to what we expect when we go to, say, a Broadway show, right? So audiences may be behaving a little bit differently. Although all of the plays are dealing with ideas that are about the politics and culture of Athens. And so they are frequently thinking through, right, thorny political issues. Here are some images of theater spaces in ancient Greece. You can see, well, some of these ruins are contemporary photographs of the ruins that are still present. So, but you can see that the structure of the theater space often determined what was performed. And that's a kind of a theme as well in the history of theater. But you have, in this case, the orchestra, which is a place where the chorus would be dancing. And in the top image here, you can see a group of people standing in the orchestra area, which would be the dancing place. The seating that rises up in the hillside there would be called the theatron. And that means seeing place. And that is where we get our word theater today. The other important aspects in the diagram on the lower right here, parodos means the entryway. So there were particular ways for actors to enter to get onto the playing area. And then the skene, which we don't see in the background in either of these photographs, but the skene was a building and a raised platform where actors would perform and they would engage with the chorus from there. And here's just another image of a theater, right? You can really see the audience here. We have, there's no one in the audience, but the way the audience seating works, kind of raked up the hillside. So a couple of other things to know about Greek tragedy. There's a chorus, as I mentioned, and they dance and sing dithyrambs, which are hymns of praise to gods. The choral movement is often used as training for military work, actually. And so, so in some ways, the chorus is performing their citizenship as kind of future soldiers, right, or past soldiers. This is a chorus of old men. Eventually, there are 3 actors in addition to the chorus who play the main roles in the play. And as I mentioned, Thespis was the first actor. So if you were in a thespian society, or if your high school had a thespian society, you can thank Thespis for that. The performers wore masks in Greek tragedy. That's one of the conventions. And again, we see that in McNally's play, right? The mask maker is an important character in that first scene. And so these, again, are drawings, and the terracotta image at the top is not an actual used mask for Greek tragedy. There are some theorists who suggest that the masks had some kind of megaphone quality to them, amplifying the voice. It's unclear whether that is the case or not, but masks were a key aspect of drama in ancient Greece. And our 3 tragic authors in ancient Greece are Aeschylus, Sophocles, and Euripides. You won't be responsible for knowing these for the exam, but it's helpful to, I think, to look at them in this sort of statuary bust way, right? Aeschylus is known for the plays The Oresteia and The Persians. The Oresteia is a really interesting example because it is 3 plays that all were performed together as a trilogy. And it's the only set of 3 plays that still survives. Sophocles is known for the play Oedipus Rex or Oedipus the King, which you may have read in high school about, and certainly if you've studied psychoanalysis, right? Sigmund Freud is very interested in the idea of the Oedipus complex. This is the story of a man who murders his father and marries his mother, right? And so Oedipus, again, there's a series of plays about him and his family, but they were not necessarily performed together as trilogies. And finally, Euripides, who is known for the plays Medea and the Bacchae. Medea is a play about a woman who kills her children in order to take revenge on her husband for leaving her. So again, big characters in these plays, right? Big heroes, big villains, lots of larger than life characteristics to think about there. Aristotle was a Greek philosopher and theorist who was interested in the history of theater. So he wrote this critique of Greek theater called the Poetics. And the Poetics is a piece about poetry, but specifically about dramatic poetry. And so he's very interested in actually considering this kind of a recipe for successful theater. One of the elements of that is catharsis. That's an important word to know, which means purging pity and fear. So Aristotle had a belief that we would go to the theater and see someone who was better than ourselves, but similar to ourselves, and we would see them go through a bad dramatic experience, and we would have both pity and fear and hope that the same thing did not happen to us afterwards. Some aspects of Aristotle's recipe here. Plot is the most important. After that is character. So the character kind of supports the plot. Thought, a key idea, right? A central theme of the play is something that very much interests Aristotle. Language is important as well, right? So the playwright is writing the language that the actors will speak and that will show the thought of the play, the main ideas of the play. So the playwright is crafting language to create character and plot and thought. Music or song is another important aspect, right? Once we've got a script, we can stage it. And so we have the chorus performing and singing the words that the playwright has written. And there's a musical component to that as well. And then spectacle. So scene painting is something that Sophocles added, and we'll talk a lot about design in this course as we get to the middle, and all of that is related to spectacle. So plot, character, thought, language, music, and spectacle are the 6 key aspects of tragedy, according to Aristotle. Useful to know. All right, we're going to jump forward a little bit to medieval Europe. We're talking now about around the fall of Rome in 476 to about the 1400s. And here we have a lovely image from a bestiary of people dancing with animals that may represent a kind of folk theater of the Middle Ages. So when we think about citizenship in the Middle Ages, a lot of times when we talk about medieval Europe, we talk about the great chain of being. So being a citizen in medieval Europe means having a relationship with God. And so God is at the top of this great chain of being, and everybody else is in kind of hierarchical relationships in between. So here's an image that kind of shows that, right? Humans are below heaven and angels and God, but above beasts and plants and flame. And so this idea that, but you can also see gradations within the human world, so that as a citizen in the medieval world, your relationship, if you were, say, a peasant, right, and you worked the land for a lord, then your relationship to that person was sort of conscribed, right, by religion. And so the great chain of being is one way we think about citizenship in the medieval period. A lot of medieval theater is invested in mystery plays and cycle plays. And this was an idea to stage all of biblical history from Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden through the end of time, which is the book of Revelation in the Bible. So these are done all over Europe, primarily France, Spain, England. And the York cycle in England has 48 plays. The Wakefield cycle is another British cycle play that has 32 plays. The Oberammergau Passion Play is really interesting. It's done in Germany every 10 years. The 2020 version was canceled and postponed to 2022 because of COVID. But what happened in the 16th century was that they made a bargain with God in Oberammergau that if they survived the plague, they would then stage this passion play every 10 years. And they have kept up their end of the bargain after surviving the plague. So every 10 years, although they're 2 years off their cycle for 2022. Pageant wagons are a way that these plays may have been staged. So the guilds would be responsible for staging the plays, and your job sort of determined the play that would be one that you staged. So for instance, the bread bakers, right, would be in charge of the Last Supper, for instance. So right, you can see the wagon can be taken around the town and can be altered to create a stage and then adjusted to travel again. So you see a couple of different images here of what a pageant wagon might have looked like. Another way that we might think about staging in the Middle Ages is mansion staging, and this was, this is perhaps a later technique, but if we look at, a lot of times churches will have different chapels along the side, and so various scenes in these plays might be staged in different chapels around the church. But again, the key ideas from the Middle Ages are going to be thinking about yourself as a citizen, in Europe anyway, in relation to religion and the Catholic Church. Now we move on to the Renaissance and Restoration, where religion remains very influential, but also to be a citizen in Europe in these periods is to be subject to a monarch, right? So a lot of the playwrights in these periods, Shakespeare, Moliere, are writing plays that are to honor the king or queen where they live. The Renaissance, we know Renaissance is a term meaning rebirth. Sebastiano Serlio is an Italian scenic artist who's interested, an architect as well, who depicts here the tragic scene and the comic scene. So on your left, you have this image of a kind of regimented square with some arches, but the lines of it are very rigid for the most part, where on the right you have rounded arches, you have a lot of spaces for hiding, you have a lot of doorways. And so on your left, you have the tragic scene, which is more about order, and on your right, you have the comic scene, which is creating an environment for more chaotic action. Shakespeare is an important figure in the Renaissance period. This is an engraving of Shakespeare from the 1623 folio of his works, a collection of his plays put together after his death by his friends. Shakespeare, of course, is writing primarily, well, actually, about half of his career as a writer is under Queen Elizabeth I, and the other half is under King James I. So the Dishley portrait here of Queen Elizabeth shows us a woman in a very large gown, a very opulent gown with white, and there are various designs on the gown. Yeah, she's also standing on a map of England here and showing us that she is looking from stormy weather into sunny weather. So the iconography of this image is telling us that Queen Elizabeth is in some ways the savior of England, right? That she is guiding her people from stormy weather into sunnier climes. Shakespeare's Globe is a theater that still exists in London. There's not a continuous history, but there was in the 1990s, this stage was built to honor and to kind of experiment as a laboratory with the history of Shakespeare's theater. So you can see a kind of thrust stage here with the audience able to really stand very close to the stage, and then other audience members are sitting in a balcony. But the relationship between the actors and the audience is very direct in Shakespeare's plays. This is also an outdoor theater, so if you're in the rain, you're in the rain. Sometimes they cancel the show if the weather is not good. But yeah, but we have this idea of, I think, Shakespeare, the history of Shakespeare, right? I think the importance of Shakespeare as a canonical figure is something that people, especially in Britain, care about. And so the Shakespeare's Globe has become this place where there's a sense of upholding a tradition of Shakespeare performance. Moving on to France then, Molière is a similar figure to Shakespeare in that he had a particular relationship with a king. And the king was Louis XIV. So we can see Molière on your left here, he's in his Roman costume. He's got a long wig or dark hair, and he has a mustache and red fabric kind of echoing the idea that he's a Roman hero. Where Louis on the right here is wearing blue fabric with fleur-de-lis that are yellow, and then it's also lined with ermine, which is a very expensive fur. And he is showing off a lot of leg, right? He's showing us that he is virile, and the calf is a very sexy part of the body for men in this period. So he's got a nice big heel on his shoe to really accentuate his calves for the ladies, I suppose, at this time. Right. The Restoration in England is actually around the same time period that Molière and Louis XIV are connected, but Charles II is the King of England at this time. He comes back from exile in France. This is a time of prosperity in England. There's a court culture that's very gossipy and sexually saturated, and again, strongly influenced by the court culture of France. Now, Charles's tastes are what the playwrights of the time try to they tried to imitate the tastes of Charles. So Restoration comedy is a lot about the citizenship of people under the King Charles I specifically, but the kind of court culture and gossip that existed at this time. So here's the actor Colley Cibber as Lord Foppington in The Relapse by John Vanbrugh. And the fop is a kind of character who is interested in fashion, interested in gossip, and interested in relationships among men and women. And so we see here this very exaggerated gesture of Colley Cibber as the fop using snuff, which is tobacco, which they would actually stuff up their nose at this time. And anyway, but the connection to make here, right, to citizenship is the idea of Charles II as the king and playwrights writing plays for him to honor his taste specifically. In the 18th century, we start to get the Enlightenment, which gives us kind of a tension between reason and sentimentalism. We see neoclassical ideals giving way to new bourgeois sentimental forms. And we also see the rise of the novel and increased literacy rates. So this kind of changes, right? We start to see a little bit of a difference between plays that are specifically meant to honor kings and queens and plays that are more interested in the individual, more interested in middle class or upper class people that are not necessarily kings and queens. This next image is of David Garrick, and this is in the play Richard III by William Shakespeare. But you can kind of see the almost romantic quality of this. If you know Romanticism in Germany, right? He's a British actor, but so he's very frightened in this scene. His gesture is very large, right? He's got his hand kind of wide spread. And Garrick was known for particular tools that helped him to express surprise and other emotions on stage. So he had a wig with a spring in it that he could push the spring in his hand and have the wig jump off of his head to create a kind of special effect. All right. Whew. So moving on then through the Enlightenment into the French Revolution, we have in 1789 a rejection of monarchy and privilege. And in McNally's play, we get this moment where the characters are sort of threatening each other, right? One character says, "Monsieur Durand, your play poses as a valentine of roses for an unsuspecting audience, but I see its sharp thorns of sedition." So the play in McNally's play that we're talking about at this moment is challenging authority, right? And so this was not a thing that was frequent in plays before this time, or at least not remarked upon as much. That's not entirely true. There's a whole discourse of anti-theatricalism. But for the purposes of our narrative today, this moment of the French Revolution gives us challenges to monarchy. And we see that in the theater as well. Specifically, there's a play by Beaumarchais called The Marriage of Figaro that becomes an opera by Mozart that is dealing with a lot of those ideas. But in any case, the French Revolution leads to a different sense of performing citizenship. And so in 1794, we get this Festival of the Supreme Being, where the French Revolution has kind of done away with Catholic religion as the national religion and created a more almost secular religion, really. And so we're celebrating the Supreme Being with a particular festival here where everybody's showing up and performing their revolutionary citizenship. They also used costume in particular ways to denote their citizenship and their support of the revolution. So this revolutionary dress, we see all three of these figures are wearing a Phrygian cap, which is a red hat that has a kind of cloth floppy sweep to it, and is the hat that is symbolic of being freed from slavery in ancient Rome. So these folks in France at this time are reclaiming that Phrygian cap as denoting their freedom from the tyranny of the king, right? The Phrygian caps here are also marked with the cockade, the tricolor cockade. So red, white, and blue are these colors of liberty, equality, and fraternity in the French Revolution. And on the left, we have a sans-culotte. So the man on the left here is wearing long pants instead of fashionable breeches. And we can see on the right, the man with the drum has the breeches tied off at the knee, where the man on the left is wearing long pants. So that is another big, right? These are the working people who dress in this way. So jumping across the 19th century then, we have realism and naturalism. Ibsen in Norway and Chekhov in Russia. And these movements, post-industrialism, are focused on questions of social problems, specifically women's rights, social class, and heredity versus environment. Ibsen is pretty strongly connected to women's rights in Norway with his play A Doll's House, and then questions of social class come up as well. And then the ideas of heredity versus environment are coming into play partly because of Charles Darwin and social Darwinism that is coming up, right? And the idea of evolution and natural selection that starts to get applied to people as well as animals. So here's Ibsen, right? You would want to know his play A Doll's House. I like these three images because he found a facial hairstyle that worked for him and just allowed it to sort of continue to grow and be reshaped throughout the course of his life. But his play A Doll's House is about a woman named Nora who leaves her husband eventually because she feels unsatisfied in their marriage. Chekhov is a Russian playwright, and we see a theme of Chekhov in McNally's play And Away We Go. His plays, he's born in Taganrog in southern Russia, and his grandfather had been a serf, a peasant who was tied to the land. But Chekhov became a medical doctor. He eventually married an actress named Olga Knipper, and he worked closely with the director Konstantin Stanislavski. We will hear more about Stanislavski during our week on directing, but he ushers in, and probably acting actually, it's more likely when we'll hear about Stanislavski. He has a specific acting method. We'll just go back to Chekhov for a second. His plays are about bored aristocrats on rural estates a lot of the time. So that's what McNally is kind of making fun of in And Away We Go. Moving to the 20th century, again, right, in And Away We Go, we get Beckett's play, Waiting for Godot. After World War II, we start to get this philosophy of existentialism. Camus and Sartre are giving us this existentialist philosophy. And so what's starting to happen, right, is this idea that in the absence of God, humans must be responsible for their own choices. So in Europe at this time, right, we've lost a kind of connection to religion as part of citizenship that we had in the Middle Ages. We've lost a connection to a monarch as defining our citizenship. And so how does the individual define themselves in the 20th century is really one of the big questions of existentialist thought. Camus has an essay about the myth of Sisyphus. Sisyphus, of course, was a Greek mythic figure who was punished after death by rolling a rock up a hill, and then every time he got the rock to the top of the hill, it would roll back down. And so what Camus argues is that we must imagine Sisyphus happy, right? Finding some joy in the moments where he's not rolling the rock, or finding some satisfaction in rolling the rock well up the hill, even though our lives are just like Sisyphus's life, right? The conditions of our lives are to sort of continue doing things that don't really matter, and we have to figure out how to find joy within that. This is not necessarily, right, a philosophy that we need to ascribe to, but Camus, in the Myth of Sisyphus, defines this existentialist philosophy. And so we end up getting a lot of theater based on that as well, absurdist theater, specifically Beckett's Waiting for Godot, which is about two men who are waiting for a man named Godot who never shows up. And so they pass the time and fill the time and try to find joy in their relationship with each other and in play and in telling jokes. So that was a whirlwind of the history of drama. Some key points, right? Drama is for teaching citizenship in many eras, but specifically in ancient Greece, how to be a democratic citizen of Athens is a major question of many plays at that time. In medieval Europe, we're getting Bible stories, so we need the knowledge of those Bible stories to be effective citizens of a Christian theocracy in Europe at this time. Thinking about the idea that drama is for social change, right? Ibsen, Chekhov, and realism are all invested in making change, driving kind of social change. Reflecting society, right? We have Queen Elizabeth, we have King Charles II, we have Louis XIV. That relationship of the citizen to the monarch is a key idea. And then, of course, drama is entertainment, and that's consistent, I think, throughout much of history. So for your discussion board post this week, we want you to think about how you are a citizen and connect these ideas of dramatic history to ideas of citizenship. So you could list some organizations to which you belong, maybe the nation of which you are a citizen, the state you live in, or the state of which you are a citizen, your city or town, right? Your university, your dorm, fraternity, sorority, your team or club, any of those things that connect you as a citizen and somewhere you feel like you belong, right? And then think about how performance helps you to express citizenship. So do you wear particular clothing to indicate that you are a citizen of a particular organization or what have you, institution? And then your assignments are to complete the readings on D2L in the dramatic history folder. You'll have that discussion board post on performing citizenship is due on Sunday. The fan language quiz is also due this week. So you'll watch a video on fan language. You should make sure you watch that more than once and learn the secret code. There is a transcript available for that if that helps you out. But that quiz is also due by 10 p.m. on Sunday, right? There's one video to watch to learn about fan language, and then there's a different video where she is illustrating the concepts within the context of the quiz. Before our next class, you should read the section in the course pack on text and the playwright, but I wouldn't worry too much about Almost Maine right now, but we will definitely want to have that read for the Scenic Design Week, which is 2 weeks from now. All right, so I think that is it. Thanks, everybody, and we will see you soon.